Yeah, David, what's different about this Clemson team? I mean, this is Dabo Swinney's 7th trip to the college football playoff. You've covered a lot of these games, as you just mentioned. What's different about the 2024 team compared to some of the other teams that he's taken to the college football playoff?
Yeah, this team probably lacks the overall depth that those teams had, some of the overall talent. Those teams had dudes all over the field. You had a T. Higgins or a Justin Ross at wide receiver. You had Travis Etienne or a Wayne Gallman at running back. You had a Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence. You had Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence on the defensive line, Cleveland Farrell, Austin Bryant. Guys are in the NFL. This team lacks that kind of depth and overall talent. You know dudes when you see them, and you know what I mean when I say dudes. This team has some dudes, just not in as many spots as those teams had.
Yeah, it's when you look at the team, I was telling BK about team speed. The Clemson team is faster than they were the year before, but there aren't a lot of dudes that are just going to go by you. They've won a lot of games as a team, as a unit. I mean, they play complementary football offensively and defensively. The quarterback is he's got enough dudes around him right now because I think he's an exceptional athlete when it comes to, knowing when to take off, when to get out of the pocket, when to make the throws. You mess around with him and you think he's going to take off and run. He'll look downfield and find an open guy. He's just that kind of an athlete. He's just a winner. But as you said, they don't have a lot of dudes. But the dudes that they have, the dude at quarterback is still a pretty good dude at 6'2", 210. He can go.
It's funny. I was taking a look at some of his numbers the other day. Kate's got 40 touchdowns that he's responsible for against only 5 interceptions. And when you compare his numbers, yards, touchdowns, interceptions, completion percentage, touchdowns responsible for, rushing yards, his numbers are better than Dylan Gabriel's. Dylan just happened to be at the helm of an undefeated Oregon team, right? Yeah. So, this kid's had an underappreciated year. I don't think people across the country realize just how good he's been. He's been able to take care of the football. He makes better decisions. And that's why this team, they've got some freshmen that they brought along this year, TJ Moore, Bryant Westco. They're only going to get better. This is a team that only loses one offensive lineman, one linebacker, the running back, the tight end, and a safety. Otherwise, this is a team that everybody led by Kay Klubnik is coming back next year. That's why they're excited, is because they feel like next year's team is a team that really is going to be poised to make a run.
David Hood from TigerNet.com joining us here on Bucky and BK. David, I want to ask you about Phil Mafah. Heard Dabo Swinney yesterday. He was asked about an injury update for Mafah, and he said he's fine. He's not taking hits this week, but he should be good to go on Saturday. Now, it feels like Clemson's run game is falling off a cliff down the stretch. Mm-hmm. What's your confidence level in Mafah, number one, being healthy, and number two, being effective against this Texas defense?
Well, the time off has been really good for him. He's got a torn labrum. And so that's not going to get better with rest. That's only going to get better after you have surgery. That's, but it's been good for him. He was, we were out at practice Tuesday, I guess it was. He looked the best to me that he's looked in probably 6 or 7 weeks. The time off that he had, the Citadel game, that Clemson played, and then they had some time off. They gave him some time off before the ACC championship. I think all of this time off has done wonders for his legs, which is good. But he's still not going to be that effective guy. And then they were bringing along a freshman, Jay Haynes, and he gets hurt on that kick return there in the ACC championship game. And now, you've got a true freshman in David Ezeamume, Keith Adams Jr., whose dad was a star linebacker at Clemson, and a kid by the name of Jarvis Green that they're high on. But these guys just haven't taken a lot of snaps this year. And so, to me, that's kind of part of it. That's why Kay Klubnik's going to be so important, is because so much of that run game is going to have to be on two, and his legs and those quick pop screens and orbit motions and flipping to wide receivers that takes a place of that run game.
Yeah, and Dave, for Texas, when you look at that defense, Andrew Makuba has made such a difference in the secondary. It's like having an extra linebacker play in your secondary, a guy who's really fluid, athletic. But man, when he comes to hit, I mean, he hits like he's about 240, but when he brings it, he brings all of it. And he's such a great tackler, and he has these great instincts That's why, like you said, when you start running orbit motion and sweeps like that, you're talking about a guy who can fill the alley. You've seen him play before. Been a while since we've seen a guy that can fill an alley like that guy. Not only as a guy who's instinctive towards the ball, but instinctive to the ball.
Yeah, I love Coobs. Yeah, he had that freshman All-American season here, and then he suffered kind of a spate of injuries. And that next year it wasn't really good. It just wasn't. He got burned a lot in coverage. There were a lot of whiffs, a lot of missed tackles, and I just felt like there was a disconnect somewhere. And then he said, I didn't feel like I was getting better at Clemson. And, sometimes you need a change of scenery, right? Like everybody, they love to hate on the transfer portal, or they hate to, they love to hate on kids who make a business decision for themselves. But I think Andrew's a guy who really and truly has benefited from that change of scenery. The talent is there. They're just, after that spate of injuries and him trying to come back, there was just a disconnect somewhere. And, I could tell a difference in that Michigan game. I think that was the first time I'd really been able to watch Texas this year. Clemson played later that night. And, I get to watch Texas against Michigan, and I'm like, wow, look at my man out there. He just looked different even then.
Yeah, he's having a great year. No doubt about that. David Hood from TigerNet.com joining us here talking Clemson and Texas. David, speaking of defense, I mean, Clemson leads the country in takeaways since the start of last season. That's been a huge MO. It was a big deal for Brent Venables when he was the DC there. And obviously that has carried over in the Wes Goodwin era as well. What's the key to that? Why is Clemson so good at taking the ball away from seemingly everybody they go up against?
Well, they've got two really good cornerbacks. They've got a freshman that they brought along by the name of Ashton Hampton, who's a bigger kid, 6'2", 6'3", 205. He's got some length. He had an unbelievable catch up at Virginia Tech. That was kind of a one-handed grab on the sideline. And then they've got Avion Terrell, whose older brother plays for the Falcons, played for Clemson, A.J. Terrell. Avion's kind of grown up around there. They've got a Texas kid by the name of R.J. Mickens, who's kind of the quarterback in the secondary at safety. And then they've always had, look, and I said earlier, not a lot of dudes, but you still got Peter Woods there at defensive tackle. You still got T.J. Parker there at defensive end. They roll in other defensive tackles who are going to play in the NFL. Guys like Trey Williams, DeMonte Capehart, Peyton Page, all those defensive tackles, they're going to play in the NFL. Peter Woods is going to be a first-round draft pick. T.J. Parker is going to be a first-round draft pick. They're good. And then they brought along that freshman linebacker, Sammy Brown, who, it's funny, he's from Georgia. And one of the guys on the team calls him that curly-headed redneck freak just because, he's a deer hunter and he's got that blonde curly mullet sticking out the back of the helmet. He might be the fastest linebacker I've laid eyes on in years. And now that they've brought him into the rotation, he plays like his hair is on fire. And you look up and you go, wow, he's got 13 tackles. He's got 14 tackles. Had a better year than the kid at Georgia who won all kinds of awards, and this kid didn't even start till the last 4 or 5 games. So they've been able to take some of these guys and get pressure on the quarterback without having to blitz, and that's kind of been the key. And when you've got a secondary kind of locking guys down, then quarterbacks begin to take chances, and these guys can go get it. And by the way, they've got another safety that'll probably play on Sunday by the name of Khalil Barnes, who just really reads everything.
Well, I mean, when you look at as I said, this team plays such good complementary football, and that's the successes I think due to that. And as you said, when you got a young offensive line and you've got young runners behind a young offensive line, and you feel like the following year is the year for this group. The Texas defensive line has been for the last 2 years been something really, really special. We thought they would be after last year. I thought, obviously, I just said to myself, I said, you can't have a first-round draft pick and a second-round guy and one of the best the best defensive linemen go, and you're going to miss them. And there hasn't been a drop-off. And if you've got a young offensive line, boy, they got their hands full this weekend. Well,
that's probably one good thing about it is that this offensive line does come back, but this is a bunch of older guys. You've got Tristan Lee, who's a 2-year starter at left tackle. You've got Marcus Tate, who's basically a 4-year starter at left guard. They've got a first-year starter at center, but he's been around for 4 years. Walker Parks, the right guard, he's probably played 3,000 snaps here. So they've and Blake Miller's a junior. So all these guys get to come back, but they've played a lot of football, and you just can't overstate how much Matt Luke, who was of course the Ole Miss head coach and then the offensive line coach at Georgia, has meant to this program and this offensive line. There are a bunch of dudes up there too. These guys can play. Blake Miller's been really good in pass protection. I think only one pressure allowed the last 6 games at right tackle. A couple of those he even had to move over to left tackle when they had some injuries. But man, I love Texas's defensive line, and I went and did an inside the numbers piece on the Texas defense, and it kind of blew me away to realize that the most yards they gave up this year was 329 to Florida. Nobody else cracked 300. Why did Florida get 329? Well, Texas went up 35-0 on the Gators and, kind of played soft. That's dominant defense. That's what that is. And, and talking to some people down that way, they're not just good on the defensive line. They're good at all 3 levels. They're good at defensive line. They're good at linebacker, and then they're good in the back end. And when you put together the great scheme that they have, it's just dangerous. There's a reason that Georgia didn't get to 300 in 2 games on them. There's a reason all these good offenses didn't get to 300 on them. And, it's kind of like I tell everybody, Clemson's got its hands full Saturday. They have their hands full. It's going to take Clemson's A+ game.
Yeah, kind of following up on that, David. I mean, what does Clemson have to do right to pull off the upset on Saturday?
Well, take care of the football, number one, and they've been able to do that. But you've got to find some semblance of a running game. You've got, whether that's with Klubnik or you're using wide receivers to do things, whatever. You've got to be able to keep that Texas defense honest. So you've got to run the football even when it looks like you can't. Even if you're being stuffed early, you've got to stick with it. And then this is a team that has had trouble playing 4 quarters of football. They will play lights out for 2 quarters or 3 quarters, and then there's a quarter in there where it all kind of blows up on them. You saw it against SMU. You saw it against South Carolina, where they just dominated South Carolina for really almost 3.5 quarters. Still find a way to lose. SMU dominated for 3 quarters. Still let SMU back in the game there in the 4th quarter. They've got to put 4 quarters together against Texas. Anything less than that, and you're not only going to lose, you're probably going to get blown out. And that's just a fact. So find a semblance of a running game, play 4 quarters, turnover-free football, and in some way you've got to kind of stop that 2-headed monster with Wisner and Blue. That running game, somehow you've got to put a stop to that, make Quinn Ewers kind of one-dimensional, and prepare for Arch Manning, because I think Arch Manning could be the key to some of their red zone issues.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, there are teams that play really, really well. There are championship level teams that don't always play championship level. They get I as a coach, I like to say they get disinterested in the game. I'm like, how do you get disinterested for 9-10 minutes in a football game? It's like you're just coming out to practice, loosening up, but you're in the middle of a football game. Is that what it seems like Clemson does? How like SMU got back in it in the third quarter? I'm like, why are you disinterested? You can blow this team away by 40, it looks like right now.
Yeah, it's almost a thing of the offense not helping the defense, and that the offense will play great, and then they kind of go into a shell. They get a lead, and it all of a sudden becomes really conservative. And then all of a sudden you put together a couple of 3-and-outs. The defense starts to get a little bit tired, and you're not playing that complementary football that you like to have. And Garrett Riley, the offensive coordinator, told us that this week, that he's disappointed, that they really need to pull out all the stops and keep all the stops going for 4 quarters.
Sure.
I liken it to Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier, didn't matter who he was playing. If he's up 35-0, he's still throwing that ball all over the yard.
Yeah.
Steve Spurrier's not going to run it up the middle on, 3rd and 14. It's going to throw it everywhere, right? And that's what you have to do in today's game, because everybody has good players. You put your foot on somebody's throat, you got to keep stomping.
Yeah, well said. David Hood from TigerNet.com joining us here on Texas Sports Unfiltered. Last one for me, David. Would love a score prediction for the game on Saturday. Texas currently a 12-point favorite. You cover Clemson. You know the team better than anybody else. Do you think the Tigers have enough in the tank to shock the world on Saturday, or do you think the Longhorns protect home field and move on?
I do think the Longhorns protect home field and move on. They're just the better team right now. I think Clemson has one thing going for them. I've been at practice this week. I've talked to everybody. They're loose. These guys feel like they have nothing to lose. Nobody's picking them to win, so they can go and let it all hang out. And I feel like Clemson can hang with them for a while, but I feel like Texas is just too good. That defense is too dominant. And, I'm kind of in that 24, 27, 13 field. That's kind of where I am. Could be worse, could be closer, but that's I think that point spread's about right.
Right on. David, great stuff, man. I've been scavenging TigerNet.com this week, preparing for these shows and preparing for the game on Saturday. You guys do phenomenal work, and thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us this morning to preview the game.
Thank you, David.
Hey, I can't wait to get back. Thank you for having me.